The diesel smoke from Charlie Hayes's 1947 Farmall M drifted across the county road that September morning in 1967, and every farmer who passed by shook their head. Gray and thin against the brightening Nebraska sky, that ancient red tractor looked like something pulled from a museum. Charlie didn't look up. He kept his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the furrow line ahead, ignoring the newer green and yellow machines that roared past with their enclosed cabs and hydraulic lifts. His Farmall backfired once, coughed black smoke, then settled back into its rhythm, and Charlie Hayes just nodded like he was having a conversation with an old friend who'd been with him through every drought and every harvest since his father died and left him this quarter section of hard Nebraska clay. Most folks in Harlan County that year were talking about progress. The implement dealer over in Kearney had moved more new tractors in the first 8 months of 1967 than he'd sold in the previous 3 years combined. Every week, another farmer would roll into town on a brand new John Deere 4020 or an International 1206 with air conditioning and a radio and enough horsepower to pull twice what Charlie's old Farmall could manage on its best day. The bank was handing out equipment loans like carnival prizes, 5% interest with nothing down and 7 years to pay. The salesmen in their short-sleeve dress shirts and skinny ties would stand in the Longhorn Cafe on Saturday mornings and tell anyone who'd listen that the future of farming was here. That the small operator who didn't modernize would be plowed under by 1970. Charlie Hayes heard all of it. He'd sit in his usual booth by the window, drinking black coffee and eating eggs and toast, and he'd listen to Dale Mortensen brag about his new 4020 with the 8-speed transmission. Charlie would nod politely, say something like, "Sounds real nice," and then he'd pay his check and walk out to where his 1952 Ford pickup was parked next to all those newer trucks, and he'd drive back out to his place on County Road 17, where his Farmall sat in the equipment shed like a relic from another age. What nobody knew, because Charlie Hayes wasn't the kind of man who talked about his business with the coffee shop crowd, was that he'd been paying double payments on his land mortgage for the past 4 years. His father had bought the original 80 acres in 1938 with money borrowed from the Farmers National Bank in Kearney, and he died in 1952 from a heart attack during wheat harvest. Charlie had inherited both the land and the debt. The bank had restructured the loan, given Charlie 20 years to pay it off, and every month since then, Charlie had been sending in his payment, plus whatever extra he could scrape together from selling hogs or hiring out his time fixing other people's machinery. By September 1967, he owed less than $8,000 on land that was worth at least $40,000, maybe more if corn prices held steady. And Charlie Hayes had made himself a promise the day they lowered his father into the cemetery plot behind the Methodist church, that he would own that land free and clear before he turned 40 years old. He was 37 that fall. He had 2 years and 9 months to keep his promise. Now think about what you would have done if you were in Charlie's position. Watching your neighbors drive past on machines that cost more than your entire farm was worth 20 years ago. Listening to them talk about progress and modernization and competing in the new agriculture economy, and you're still running equipment that was old when Truman was president, would you have held your ground, or would the pressure have gotten to you? Because what happened next in Harlan County that autumn would test Charlie Hayes in ways that had nothing to do with horsepower or hydraulics. The first real problem started in late September when Dale Mortensen's new John Deere 4020 broke through the fence line between his property and Charlie's South 40. Dale was running his new moldboard plow, turning under corn stubble and getting ready for winter wheat, and he'd been showing off a little bit, running the 40-20 faster than he probably should have. When he came to the corner of his field, he misjudged the turn. The plow caught the corner post of Charlie's barbed wire fence and pulled out 30 yards of wire before Dale could get the tractor stopped. The fence posts leaned at crazy angles. The wire was stretched and kinked. Dale just sat there in his air-conditioned cab looking at the damage like he couldn't quite believe what he'd done. Charlie was working on the Farmall's carburetor in his equipment shed when he heard the racket. He walked down to the fence line, wiping grease off his hands with a red shop rag, and found Dale climbing down from the 40-20 with an embarrassed look on his face that didn't quite match the defensive tone in his voice when he said, "Fence was probably rotten anyway, Charlie. Thing looks like it's been here since Roosevelt." Charlie looked at the broken fence, then at Dale, then back at the fence. "Poles are treated oak," he said quietly. "Wires galvanized. Put it up myself in 1959. Wasn't rotten." "Well, I'll send my boy over to help you fix it," Dale said, already turning back toward his tractor. "Gotta get this plowing done while the weather holds." "Dale," Charlie said, and something in his voice made the other man stop. "You broke it. You fix it. Today." Dale Mortensen turned around and his face had gone red. "I just told you I'd send Billy over." "I don't want Billy. I want you. This afternoon. I got spare wire and posts in my shed. We'll have it done in 2 hours if we both work." The thing was, Dale Mortensen didn't think he should have to spend his afternoon fixing fence like some hired hand. He had a new $7,500 tractor sitting there idling. He had 200 acres to plow before the ground froze, and he had an image in his mind of himself as a modern farmer, a businessman, not some fence post digger. He looked at Charlie Hayes standing there in his worn denim jacket and work boots held together with baling wire, and something ugly came into his expression. "You know what your problem is, Charlie?" Dale said. "You're still farming like it's 1940. You're out here with that museum piece Farmall, patching fence by hand, probably still shocking your own grain. The rest of us are trying to build real operations, modern farms, and you're holding on to the past like some kind of, I don't know, like some kind of stubborn old fool." Charlie didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Maybe so, but my fence is still broken and you broke it. I'll expect you around 2, Brew." He turned and walked back toward his shed, and Dale Mortensen stood there next to his new John Deere, feeling like he'd just been dismissed by the principal, and he didn't like it one bit. Dale never showed up that afternoon. Charlie fixed the fence himself, digging new post holes with a hand auger, stretching new wire with a come-along and fence pliers, working until the sun went down and his shoulders ached. The next Saturday at the Longhorn Cafe, Dale told the story like it was a joke, making Charlie out to be some kind of backward old hermit who couldn't accept that farming had changed. A few of the other farmers laughed, a few didn't. But the story spread, and by October, Charlie Hayes had a reputation in Harlan County as the man who was too stubborn or too poor to modernize. The last holdout, the farmer who'd be gone in another 5 years when his old equipment finally gave out for good. Charlie heard the talk. He didn't respond to it. He just kept farming his quarter section the way he'd always farmed it, running his Farmall from first light to dusk, fixing what broke, making do with what he had. And every month, he sent in his double payment to the Farmers National Bank, watching that remaining balance drop a little bit lower. Then November came, and the weather turned strange. It started with a warm spell that pushed temperatures into the 60s when they should have been in the 30s. Then the wind shifted to the south and brought up moisture from the Gulf. By the 3rd week of November, it was raining, steady, cold rain that turned the county roads to mud and made the fields too soft to work. The farmers who'd been counting on getting their winter wheat in before Thanksgiving found themselves stuck, watching the calendar and watching the sky and hoping the rain would break. It rained for 6 days straight. When it finally stopped, the temperature dropped 30 degrees in one night and the ground started to freeze. Ray Kellerman was the first one to panic. He had 120 acres of winter wheat seed already paid for, sitting in bags in his barn. If he didn't get it in the ground by the 1st week of December, the whole planting window would close, and he'd have wasted $3,000 on seed he couldn't use. He fired up his new International 1206 on a Tuesday morning when the fields were still half frozen and muddy underneath, and he tried to run his grain drill through the south field. Within an hour, he'd buried that big tractor up to its axles in mud that had turned to something like cold molasses. The International sat there, its wheels spinning uselessly, diesel smoke pouring from the stack, and Ray Kellerman had to call the implement dealer in Kearney to send out a wrecker truck to pull him free. Cost him $150 for the tow, and the tractor's transmission never did work right after that. Dale Mortensen tried next, taking his John Deere 4020 out with a lighter disc harrow instead of a moldboard plow, thinking he could just scratch up the surface and get seed down before the ground froze solid. He made it about 20 yards before the 4020's front wheel sank into a soft spot, and the whole machine tilted sideways, the disc harrow dragging it down. Dale had to abandon it in the field and walk back to his house in the freezing wind, feeling like the biggest fool in Nebraska. It took 3 days and 2 other tractors to pull the Fordhouse 20 free. By then, the front axle was bent and the hydraulic lines were cracked, and Dale was looking at a repair bill that would eat up most of his equipment loan reserve. By Thanksgiving, half the farmers in Harlan County had given up on getting winter wheat planted. They'd lost their planting window, lost their seed investment, and some of them had damaged their expensive new tractors trying to force the issue. The talk at the Longhorn Cafe turned bitter. Men who'd been bragging about their modern equipment 2 months ago were now complaining about repair costs and loan payments, and how the implement dealers had oversold them on machines that were too heavy for Nebraska clay in wet conditions. And Charlie Hayes? He'd planted his 40 acres of winter wheat in the 3rd week of October, before the rains came, running his Farmall with a pull-type grain drill he'd bought used in 1955. The Farmall was light enough that it didn't sink in the soft spots, and Charlie had been farming that ground long enough to know exactly where those soft spots were. His wheat was already up, green shoots showing through the frozen crust of November earth. When the spring thaw came, he'd have a crop growing while his neighbors were still trying to decide what to do with their unused seed. Nobody mentioned it at the cafe. Nobody wanted to admit that the old-timer with the museum piece tractor had outplayed them. Here's what I want to know, and I really want you to think about this. When did farming stop being about knowing your land and start being about having the newest equipment? When did we decide that a man with an old tractor and good judgment was worth less than a man with a bank loan and a shiny paint job? Because this story is about to take a turn that nobody in Harlan County saw coming. December came in cold and stayed cold. The wind blew down from Canada and turned the fields hard as concrete. The farmers settled into their winter routines, fixing equipment in heated shops, attending Farm Bureau meetings, complaining about wheat prices and government policy. Charlie Hayes spent most of December in his unheated equipment shed, rebuilding the Farmall's generator and replacing worn gaskets in the engine, working by the light of a trouble lamp hung from a rafter, his breath fogging in the cold air. He didn't mind the work. There was something satisfying about taking apart a machine that had served him for 20 years and putting it back together better than it was before, about understanding how every piece fit and why it mattered. The real trouble started 3 days after Christmas. The Farmers National Bank in Kearney sent out a letter to all its agricultural loan customers. The letter said that due to changes in federal lending regulations and increased costs of doing business, the bank would be adjusting its interest rates on all outstanding mortgages effective February 1st, 1968. For most farmers, that meant their monthly payment was going up by 15 to 20%. For Charlie Hayes, who'd been aggressively paying down his principal, it meant his remaining balance would cost him a lot more to retire if he didn't get it paid off before the new rates kicked in. Charlie read the letter sitting at his kitchen table, and he did the math in his head. He owed $7,800. At the current rate, with his double payments, he could have it paid off by September 1968, 3 months before his 40th birthday, keeping his promise to his father. But if the new rates kicked in February, and if he had to reduce his extra payments to cover the higher monthly cost, he might not get it paid off until 1970, maybe later. The promise he'd made himself, the thing that had driven him for 15 years, would be broken by a bank policy change he had no control over. He sat there for a long time, looking at the letter, thinking about his options. Then he folded the letter carefully, put it in the drawer with his other farm records, and went out to the equipment shed. He had 8 months. He needed to find a way to come up with $7,800 before February. That's when Charlie Hayes did something nobody expected. He started hiring himself out. See, Charlie might have been running old equipment, but he knew how to fix just about anything with an engine and wheels. And after November's mud disaster, there were a lot of expensive new tractors in Harlan County that weren't running right. The implement dealers would charge $100 just to send a mechanic out to look at a problem, and then parts and labor could run into the hundreds more. Farmers who were already stretched thin on their equipment loans were looking for cheaper options. Charlie started quietly letting it be known that he'd do tractor repair for half what the dealers charged, and he'd come to you, and he'd have you running again the same day. His first job was Ray Kellerman's International 1206, the one with the transmission that never worked right after getting stuck in the mud. The dealer wanted $800 to rebuild the transmission. Charlie came out on a Saturday morning with his toolbox in the back of his Ford pickup, and he spent 6 hours in Ray's shop. When he was done, the transmission shifted smooth as butter. He charged Ray $200, and Ray paid in cash and told 3 other farmers about it before the week was out. Dale Mortensen heard about Charlie fixing tractors, and it ate at him. Here was the man he'd called a stubborn old fool, the man who supposedly couldn't accept modern farming, and that man was keeping all the modern equipment running while the modern farmers stood around helpless every time something broke. Dale's John Deere needed work too. That bent front axle was causing the steering to pull hard to the left, but Dale would have rather paid the dealer triple than ask Charlie Hayes for help. By the end of January, Charlie had fixed 11 tractors, 2 combines, a grain truck, and a pickup that wouldn't start in cold weather. He'd made almost $3,000, all cash, all paid by farmers who were grateful to have their equipment working again without bankrupting themselves at the dealer. Charlie put every dollar of it toward his mortgage. When February 1st came and the new interest rates kicked in, Charlie Hayes owed the Farmers National Bank $4,100, and he had 7 months to earn it. He kept fixing equipment through February and March, working 16-hour days, splitting his time between his own farming operation and repair jobs all over Harlan County. The Farmall M ran every day, plowing and dissing and harrowing, doing the work of tractors twice its size just by running longer hours and never breaking down. Charlie had rebuilt that tractor so many times he could practically take it apart and put it together blindfolded. When something did break, he fixed it with whatever he had on hand, a piece of welding rod, a bolt from his coffee can full of salvage hardware, a gasket cut from an old inner tube. The tractor was held together with ingenuity and stubbornness and intimate knowledge of every bolt and bearing, and it just kept running. By May, Charlie had the mortgage down to $1,800. That's when Dale Mortensen made his move. See, Dale had been watching Charlie all winter and spring, watching him drive around the county in that old Ford pickup, fixing everyone's tractors, making money, earning respect from farmers who used to dismiss him as a relic. And it drove Dale crazy, because in Dale's mind, he was the modern farmer, the successful one, the man with the new equipment and the progressive operation. Charlie Hayes was supposed to be the failure, the cautionary tale, the guy everyone pointed to as an example of what happens when you don't keep up with the times. But it wasn't working out that way, and Dale needed to do something to prove he was right and Charlie was wrong. So Dale went to the county commissioners with a complaint. He said that Charlie Hayes was operating an unlicensed repair business out of his farm, that he was competing unfairly with legitimate implement dealers who had to pay for storefronts and insurance and employee wages, that he was probably violating zoning regulations and tax codes and who knows what else. Dale dressed it up in language about protecting local businesses and maintaining community standards. But what he really wanted was to shut Charlie down, to take away the thing that was letting Charlie succeed, while Dale's own operation was drowning in equipment payments and repair bills. The county commissioners listened to Dale's complaint. Then they sent someone out to talk to Charlie. The commissioner who came out was a man named Ed Winters, a retired farmer himself who'd served on the county board for 12 years. He drove out to Charlie's place on a Thursday afternoon in late May and found Charlie in his equipment shed replacing the clutch on a neighbor's Alice Chalmers. Ed stood in the doorway for a minute, watching Charlie work, and then he cleared his throat and said, "Got a few minutes, Charlie?" Charlie slid out from under the tractor, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sure, Ed. What can I do for you?" Ed explained about Dale's complaint, about the concerns regarding unlicensed business activity and zoning violations. He was apologetic about it, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation, but he had a job to do, and he was going to do it. When he finished explaining, he looked at Charlie and said, "Now, I know you're just helping folks out, and Lord knows this county needs someone who can fix a tractor without charging an arm and a leg. But technically, Dale's got a point. You're running a business here, and there's regulations about that." Charlie nodded slowly. "What do I need to do?" "Well, you need to register as a business with the county, get a tax ID, probably pay some fees, and you need to comply with zoning, which means, well, this is agricultural land, Charlie. You can't run a commercial repair operation out here without a variance, and getting a variance means going before the Planning Commission." Ed paused. "And Dale's on the Planning Commission. So Dale gets to decide whether I can keep fixing tractors. That's about the size of it." Ed looked genuinely sorry. "For what it's worth, I think Dale's being small about this. But rules are rules." Charlie thought about it for a minute. Then he said, "When's the next Planning Commission meeting?" 2 weeks, second Tuesday of June. I'll be there." Ed nodded, relieved that Charlie wasn't going to make a fight of it. "Good man. I'll make sure you're on the agenda." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Charlie, you're doing good work out here. Don't let Dale get to you." "I won't," Charlie said. But he knew what this meant. 2 weeks was time enough to finish a couple of jobs he'd already started, but after that, he'd have to stop taking repair work until the Planning Commission ruled. And that ruling was going to depend on Dale Mortenson's vote. And Dale Mortenson hated Charlie Hayes more than he'd ever hated anyone in his life. Now, I want you to think about what you'd do if you were Charlie. You're $1,800 away from paying off your farm, keeping a 15-year promise to your dead father. And the man who's trying to shut you down is the same man who broke your fence and called you a fool. Do you fight back? Do you try to reason with him? Do you find another way? Because what Charlie decided to do would change everything. The Planning Commission meeting was held in the basement of the county courthouse on the second Tuesday of June 1968. The room was small and stuffy, with folding chairs set up in rows facing a long table where the 5 commissioners sat. Dale Mortenson was there, dressed in a sport coat and tie, looking official and important. The other 4 commissioners were local business owners and farmers, including Ed Winters, and they all looked like they'd rather be somewhere else. Charlie showed up wearing clean work pants and a button-down shirt, his good boots, his hat in his hands. There were about 20 other people in the room, farmers mostly, men who'd had their tractors fixed by Charlie, or who'd heard about the dispute and wanted to see how it turned out. The room smelled like coffee and floor wax and old paper. The commission chairman, a man named Vernon Pike who owned the feed store in town, called the meeting to order and ran through some routine business, approving minutes, discussing a road maintenance issue, hearing a petition about a new grain bin. Then, he looked at his agenda and said, "Next item is a zoning variance request from Charles Hayes regarding commercial repair activity at his agricultural property on County Road 17. Charlie, you want to come up and explain what you're asking for?" Charlie stood up and walked to the front of the room. He didn't have any papers or presentation materials. He just stood there and said, "I've been fixing tractors for my neighbors since January, charging about half what the implement dealers charge, helping folks keep their equipment running. Dale Mortenson filed a complaint saying I need a commercial variance to keep doing it, so I'm here to request that variance." Vernon Pike nodded. Thank you, Charlie. Dale, you filed the original complaint. You want to respond? Dale stood up, and you could see he'd prepared for this. He had a folder full of papers, and he launched into a speech about the importance of maintaining proper business standards, about how unlicensed repair operations create liability issues for the county, about how legitimate businesses that follow all the rules and pay all the fees and taxes deserve protection from unfair competition. He made it sound reasonable, almost public-spirited, but everyone in that room knew it was personal. When Dale finished, Vernon Pike looked at the other commissioners. Anyone have questions for either of these gentlemen? Ed Winters spoke up. Charlie, how much you charging for this repair work? Depends on the job, usually about half the dealer rates. You paying taxes on that income? Yes, sir, reporting it all, paying quarterly estimated tax. You got liability insurance? No, sir, but I tell every customer that if I break something, I'll fix it for free. Ever break anything? Not yet. One of the other commissioners, a man named Bob Henshaw, who ran the hardware store, said, Dale, the implement dealer you're worried about, that's the John Deere place over in Kearney, right? How many jobs you think Charlie's taken from them? Dale shifted uncomfortably. I couldn't say exactly. Because it seems to me, Bob continued, most of the folks Charlie's working for couldn't afford the dealer rates anyway, so it's not really taking business from anyone. It's creating a service that didn't exist before. Dale's face was getting red. That's not the point. The point is, there are regulations. There are, Vernon Pike interrupted, but there's also common sense. He looked at Charlie. Charlie, I got a question for you. Why are you doing this repair work? You need the money that bad? The room got very quiet. Charlie looked at Vernon Pike, and for a moment he considered lying, making up something about equipment costs or farm expenses. Then he decided these men deserved the truth. My father bought our land in 1938, Charlie said quietly. Borrowed money from the bank to do it. When he died in 1952, I inherited the land and the debt. I promised myself I'd pay it off free and clear before I turned 40. I'm 38 now. I owe the bank $1,800. The repair work is how I'm earning money to make that final payment. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Ed Winters asked, When do you turn 40, Charlie? September 14th. Vernon Pike leaned back in his chair. So you got 3 months to earn $1,800. Yes, sir. Dale Mortensen stood up again, and his voice was sharp. That's a nice story, but it doesn't change the fact that he's violating zoning regulations. His personal financial situation isn't relevant to— Sit down, Dale. Vernon Pike's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through Dale's speech like a knife. Dale sat down, looking shocked. Vernon looked at Charlie. This variance you're requesting? You need it permanent, or just through September? Just through September, sir. After that, I'll have the money I need. Won't have time for repair work anyway once harvest starts. Vernon looked at the other commissioners. I don't think we need to debate this much. Charlie's asking for a temporary variance to run a repair business for 3 months so he can pay off his father's mortgage. He's charging fair prices, paying his taxes, and helping his neighbors. I move we approve the variance through September 30th. All in favor? 3 hands went up immediately, Vernon's, Ed's, and Bob's. The 4th commissioner, a woman named Martha Cook, who owned the beauty shop in town, raised her hand too. That was 4 votes, a clear majority. Dale Mortensen sat at the commission table, his face purple with rage, his vote the only one against. The variance was approved. Charlie thanked the commission and walked out of the courthouse, and 20 farmers followed him. In the parking lot, they lined up to ask when he could come fix their equipment. Charlie booked work straight through to the end of September, enough jobs to earn not just the $1,800 he needed, but another 1,000 on top of it. Dale Mortensen sat in his truck in the courthouse parking lot and watched it happen. And something in him twisted and hardened and turned mean. Now here's where the story takes a darker turn. So if you've been following along this far, stay with me, because what happens next is going to show you exactly what kind of man Dale Mortensen really was, and exactly what kind of man Charlie Hayes was too. Charlie worked through June and July like a man possessed, fixing tractors in the blazing heat, coming home after dark covered in grease and hydraulic fluid and diesel fuel, eating a cold dinner and then updating his payment records, watching that mortgage balance drop week by week. By the end of July, he'd paid the bank down to $900. By mid-August, it was $450. He was going to make it. He was going to keep his promise. That's when Dale's John Deere 4020 caught fire. It happened on a Sunday afternoon in the third week of August. Dale had been running the 4020 with a hay baler, working a field of alfalfa that should have been cut 2 weeks earlier, but had been delayed by rain. The hay was dry, maybe too dry, and the afternoon was hot and still. No wind, the temperature pushing 95 degrees. Dale was hurrying, trying to get the field finished before dark, running the 4020 harder than he should have. Nobody knows exactly what failed. Maybe a hydraulic line, maybe a fuel line, maybe just a wire rubbing through insulation after years of hard use. But something sparked and something leaked, and suddenly the back of the John Deere was on fire. Dale jumped off the tractor and ran. That was the right thing to do, because 10 seconds later the fuel tank exploded and the whole machine was engulfed in flames. The fire spread to the hay baler, then to the windrows of dry alfalfa. Within minutes, Dale Mortensen had 20 acres of standing hay, burning like a torch, and a $7,500 tractor melting into scrap metal. The volunteer fire department came out from town, but by the time they got there, the tractor was gone, and the fire was running across the field toward Dale's fence line. They managed to stop it before it spread to his neighbor's property, but only barely. When the smoke cleared and the damage was assessed, Dale Mortensen was looking at a total loss. His newest tractor, his hay baler, and 40 acres of prime alfalfa hay that he'd been counting on to feed his cattle through the winter. The insurance adjuster came out on Monday. He poked through the wreckage, took photographs, filled out forms. Then he told Dale that the policy would cover the hay and the baler, but the tractor was a different story. See, there was a clause in the policy about proper maintenance, and the adjuster found evidence that the hydraulic lines hadn't been serviced according to the manufacturer's recommendations, that there were wear patterns consistent with neglect, that Dale had been running the tractor in conditions that violated the warranty terms. The insurance company would pay out for the hay and the baler, but the $7,500 John Deere 40-20 that Dale had bought on credit and still owed $4,000 on, Dale was on his own for that. Dale tried to argue. He screamed at the insurance adjuster, threatened to sue, called the company's regional office. None of it mattered. The policy said what it said, and Dale had signed it, and the tractor wasn't covered. On Tuesday afternoon, Dale Mortensen drove out to Charlie Hayes' farm. Charlie was in his equipment shed working on a final adjustment to a disc harrow he'd been repairing for a farmer over in the next county. He heard Dale's truck pull up, heard the door slam. When he looked up, Dale was standing in the doorway, and the expression on Dale's face was something Charlie had never seen before: rage and desperation, and something close to madness, all mixed together. "You," Dale said, and his voice shook. "This is your fault." Charlie set down his wrench. "Dale, I don't know what you're talking about. My tractor, the fire. If you'd been doing maintenance on it instead of running around fixing everyone else's equipment, maybe it wouldn't have burned up. Maybe I'd still have a working tractor instead of a pile of scrap metal and a bank loan I can't pay." Charlie stood up slowly. "Dale, I never worked on your 4020. You never asked me to. Because you made me look like a fool, standing up at that planning commission meeting, telling everyone about your dead father and your promise, making me look like some kind of villain for trying to enforce basic regulations. Everyone in this county thinks I'm the bad guy now and you're the hero, and it's your fault my life is falling apart." "Dale," Charlie said carefully, "I'm sorry about your tractor. I truly am. But that's not on me. You ran that machine hard. You didn't maintain it properly, and something failed. That's farming. That's the risk we all take." "Don't," Dale said, and he took a step forward. "Don't you stand there and lecture me about farming. You with your museum piece tractor, and your hand-me-down equipment, and your backward ways. You're not a real farmer. You're a relic. You should have been gone years ago, but you're too stubborn to quit. And now you're dragging the rest of us down with you." Charlie didn't say anything. He just looked at Dale, and he saw a man who'd bet everything on the idea that newer was better, that progress was inevitable, that success meant buying the biggest tractor and the best equipment and showing everyone how modern and advanced you were. And when that bet didn't pay off, when the equipment broke and the insurance didn't cover it and the bank wanted its money, Dale couldn't accept that he'd made a mistake. He needed someone to blame. And Charlie was the easiest target. "I think you should leave," Charlie said quietly. "I'll leave," Dale said. "But this isn't over. You think you're going to pay off that mortgage and ride off into the sunset? The conquering hero? Think again. I'm going to the bank. I'm going to tell them about all this cash repair work you've been doing, about how you've probably been underreporting your income, about how they should audit your tax returns. I'm going to make sure they know exactly what kind of operation you're running out here. Dale, and if that doesn't work, I'll find something else. You broke me, Charlie. You made me the laughingstock of this county. I'm going to return the favor." Dale turned and walked out, got in his truck, and drove away, leaving Charlie standing in his equipment shed with a sick feeling in his stomach and the knowledge that the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Think about this for a minute. Have you ever watched someone destroy themselves because they couldn't admit they were wrong? Have you ever seen a man blame everyone but himself for his own failures? It's an ugly thing to witness. And it's about to get uglier. Dale Mortensen went to the bank the next day, just like he said he would. He met with the branch manager, a man named Kenneth Hollister, who'd been loaning money to farmers in Harlan County for 20 years. Dale told him about Charlie's repair business, about the cash income, about his suspicions regarding tax evasion and unreported revenue. He suggested that the bank should review Charlie's mortgage terms, maybe accelerate the loan, make sure Charlie wasn't using illegal income to pay off his debt. Kenneth Hollister listened to all of it. Then he pulled Charlie Hayes's file and reviewed the payment history. What he saw was 15 years of consistent, on-time payments, never late, never missed, with increasing amounts applied to principal over the past 2 years. He saw a borrower who'd taken a 20-year mortgage and was on track to pay it off in 15, who'd weathered droughts and price crashes and equipment failures without ever asking for an extension or restructuring. He saw exactly the kind of customer every bank wants. Kenneth looked at Dale Mortensen and said, "Mr. Mortensen, I appreciate you bringing your concerns to my attention. However, Mr. Hayes's tax compliance is between him and the IRS, not between him and this bank. His payment history is exemplary. Unless you have specific evidence of fraud or criminal activity, I don't see any reason to alter his loan terms." Dale tried to push. He suggested that maybe Kenneth should look at Dale's own loan situation, his burned tractor, his need for financing to replace it. Kenneth looked at Dale's file, the maxed-out equipment loans, the past-due payments, the insurance claim that hadn't paid out, and he said very politely, "Mr. Mortensen, I think your time would be better spent managing your own financial situation rather than worrying about your neighbors." Dale left the bank feeling humiliated and furious. And that's when he started planning something that would either destroy Charlie Hayes or destroy them both. September came in hot and dry. Perfect harvest weather. Charlie finished his last repair job on September 5th and collected his final payment. When he drove to the bank on September 7th to make what would be his last mortgage payment, he had $3,218 in cash in an envelope in his jacket pocket. He owed $412. He was going to pay off the entire balance and have money left over. Kenneth Hollister processed the payment personally, stamping the documents, filing the satisfaction of mortgage, shaking Charlie's hand and congratulating him on an impressive achievement. "Your father would be proud," Kenneth said, and Charlie nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He walked out of that bank with the deed to his quarter section of land, free and clear, no debt, no liens, entirely his. He'd kept his promise with a week to spare. That night, Charlie sat at his kitchen table and looked at the deed, running his fingers over the legal description and the county seal and his own name typed in black ink. Charles Raymond Hayes, sole owner. He thought about his father, about the day in 1952 when he'd stood in the same kitchen and promised to make this happen. He thought about every double payment, every repair job, every choice to keep running the old Farmall instead of buying new equipment. It had all led to this piece of paper, this proof that he owned something that couldn't be taken away. He didn't know that Dale Mortensen was sitting in his own kitchen 2 miles away, drinking whiskey and planning arson. See, Dale had decided that if he couldn't beat Charlie through legal means, if he couldn't shame him or bankrupt him or force him to fail, then he'd just burn him out. It was an insane plan, born of whiskey and rage and desperation. But Dale wasn't thinking clearly anymore. He was thinking about his ruined tractor, his debt, his reputation. He was thinking about how Charlie Hayes had everything Dale wanted: respect, success, land that was paid for. And it wasn't fair. It wasn't right. And Dale was going to fix it. On the night of September 11th, 1968, Dale Mortensen loaded a 5-gallon can of gasoline into his truck and drove out to Charlie Hayes's property around 2 in the morning. The moon was down, the night was dark, and nobody was around to see him park his truck on the county road and walk across the field to Charlie's equipment shed. The shed was unlocked, the way it always was. Dale stepped inside, and in the darkness he could smell diesel fuel and grease and old wood. He could make out the shape of the Farmall parked in the center of the shed, could see the workbench and the tools and all the equipment that Charlie had maintained so carefully for so many years. Dale unscrewed the cap on the gasoline can and started pouring fuel across the floor, soaking the wooden walls, splashing it on the Farmall's tires and engine. He was halfway through the can when the lights came on. Charlie Hayes stood in the doorway of the shed, fully dressed, holding a tire iron in one hand. He looked at Dale, at the gasoline can, at the fuel soaking into the floor. His expression was absolutely calm. "I thought it might be you," Charlie said quietly. Dale froze. "I've been sleeping in the barn for the past 3 nights," Charlie continued. "Had a feeling you might try something." He stepped into the shed. "You can put the gasoline down now." "You don't understand," Dale said, and his voice was shaking. "You took everything from me, my reputation, my respect, everything I worked for. I didn't take anything from you, Dale. You did this to yourself. You bought equipment you couldn't afford. You didn't maintain it. You blamed everyone else when it failed. That's on you." "No," Dale said, and he was crying now, tears running down his face. "No, you made me look like a fool. You made everyone think you're better than me." "I never said I was better than you. I just made different choices." Dale looked at Charlie, at the tire iron in his hand, at the door behind him. There was no way out except through Charlie, and Charlie wasn't moving. "So what now?" Dale asked. "You going to call the sheriff? Have me arrested for attempted arson?" Charlie was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You got anyone who depends on you, Dale? Wife? Kids?" "I've got Billy, my son. He's 17. "He help you on the farm?" "Yeah." Charlie nodded. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to put that gasoline can in the back of my truck. Then you're going to help me clean up this gasoline. Then you're going to go home. And tomorrow you're going to tell Billy that you need help, that you made some mistakes, and you're going to fix them. You're going to stop blaming other people for your problems, and you're going to start acting like a man your son can be proud of." "And if I don't?" "Then I call Sheriff Patterson, and you spend the next 10 years in prison, and Billy runs that farm by himself while you're gone. Your choice. Dale looked at Charlie, and something in him broke. He set down the gasoline can and sat down on the floor and put his face in his hands. Charlie waited. After a while, Dale stood up, and the two of them spent the next hour cleaning gasoline off the floor and airing out the shed. They didn't talk much. When they were finished, Dale got in his truck and drove home. And Charlie Hayes went back to the barn and lay down on the pile of hay bales he'd been sleeping on and watched the sun rise through the gap in the barn doors. Dale Mortensen never bothered Charlie again. He sold off most of his land over the next 2 years, paid down his debts, and ended up running a smaller operation with equipment he could afford and maintain. He and Billy worked together, and slowly Dale started to rebuild his reputation, started to become the kind of farmer he should have been all along. He never apologized to Charlie, never acknowledged what had almost happened that September night. But every time he saw Charlie at the feed store or the cafe, he nodded, and Charlie would nod back. And that was enough. Charlie Hayes farmed his quarter section for another 30 years, always with paid-for equipment, always within his means. He never did buy a new tractor. The Farmall M ran until 1989, when Charlie finally retired it and donated it to a museum in Kearney, where it sits today with a plaque that tells the story of the farmer who chose debt-free land over modern equipment and made it work through skill and stubbornness and an absolute refusal to quit. Now here's what I want you to think about as we wrap this up. What's really valuable in farming? Or in life, for that matter? Is it having the newest equipment, the biggest operation, the most impressive machinery? Or is it owning your ground free and clear, knowing your craft inside and out, being able to fix what breaks and adapt when things go wrong? Charlie Hayes and Dale Mortensen started out the same year with the same opportunities, farming in the same county under the same conditions. One of them chose to chase progress and modernity. The other chose to master what he had. Only one of them ended up owning his land. I'll let you decide which approach was right. If this story made you think about your own choices, about debt and pride, and what really matters, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We've got dozens more stories about farmers and small-town life and the hard choices people made in the years when America was still figuring out what it wanted to be. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have done what Charlie did, or would you have bought the new tractor and taken the risk? I really want to know. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's dealing with debt or making hard choices about equipment, or just trying to figure out how to farm their own way in a world that's always pushing you to keep up with everyone else, share this video with them. Sometimes the old wisdom is the best wisdom, and sometimes the man who gets laughed at for driving the old tractor ends up being the only one still standing when the dust settles. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.